Above you, you have 3 people. TJ, over here. His name is TJ. He is 17. He plays baseball. Next to him is Rebecca. She's 16, and her high school band plays the bassoon. Normal kid. Next to them is Thomas. He's 13, plays basketball, likes to play video games, the norm. These are 3 average children. They look like as if they have absolutely no correlation other than the fact that they are indeed children. But they all have something in common that you don't necessarily see on the surface. Every one of these children have parents that have a problem with controlled substances. TJ, his parents are both meth addicts. Rebecca's mom is an alcoholic, and both of Thomas's parents are dead due to drug overdose. Now, these are people that you have obviously a very difficult time identifying with because you don't know them, and maybe you have never come in contact with a problem with addiction. But there's a person that every single one watching this will be able to relate to. It's me. Hi, I'm Farrel, and my father was an alcoholic for about 13 years of my life. There have been numerous occasions where he has passed out, not taken medication. I had to call the hospital a couple times. Late nights, that jazz. Horrible, horrible thing. And everyone thinks about, oh, they're addicted to something or something, but nobody ever thinks about the kids, and nobody ever remembers that for almost every single one of those alcoholics or addicts, there's a kid that's suffering because of that. Now, in a study shows, well, I have to ask the question, is addiction hereditary? Just because we have parents or relatives that are addicts, are we ourselves going to become addicts? Am I going to become an alcoholic because my dad was an alcoholic? Or my friends, are they going to become addicts and alcoholics because their parents are alcoholics? Studies show that if you are a relative of somebody with an addiction, that means that you are 8 times more likely to get an addiction yourself. And you have what scientists and people in the community call a addictive personality. And that is only if you are the child or relative of somebody in that. That's 8 times more likely. I took a poll at Belton saying that 60% of kids at this school are relatives of somebody with an addiction. That's 60% of the students that go to this school are 8 times more likely to have a problem with alcohol or any kind of narcotic. That's 60%. That's a huge number. Now, there's a lot of people out there, the other 40%, that perhaps this doesn't affect them. This doesn't apply to you. Maybe you're part of that 40%. Maybe you don't have any family members that you have ever met that have some kind of problem. And you're thinking that this doesn't apply to you, but this applies to you more than it applies to the people that are vulnerable. A common misconception is that when there is an addict or an addiction, is that is their single problem. It is the addict's problem. It only affects them, and it's theirs to deal with. But that is far, far, far from the truth. In an addiction, everyone is responsible, and everyone is affected. People with an addiction, they're the addicts. That is their role in the addiction. But the people around them, the family members, the friends, the teachers, the classmates, the people that enable them to get addicted and enable them to continue their addiction, they're what we call enablers. And by not taking the steps to get addicts the help they need and not forcing them and pushing them like you should and not handling the situation properly, you yourself are being an enabler. And it affects everyone. Because when somebody is an addict, it affects every single person around them. Friends, family. Say you have a best friend. He gets addicted to some narcotic, some drug, destroys his life. You don't have that friend anymore. You just lost a friend. And you didn't even do anything. So that other 40% is affected by this statistic. More than the 60% would be. this is a poll of people that are acquainted with somebody that's an addict, and a poll of anybody that knows anybody with an actual addiction. About 70%. So yes, everyone is affected by this. Whether you don't know anybody with an addiction or not, you know somebody that is the child or a relative of somebody with an addiction. So therefore, everyone is vulnerable to this. The youth as a whole is vulnerable to this. We're living in a society where drugs, alcohol, that kind of stuff is just the common norm. And going out and partying and getting drunk is just, it's just being a kid. It's just part of the fun. Everyone has to do it eventually. And then they get addicted to it. And then they can't stop. And then it destroys their life. Because they didn't know that they're vulnerable. And then when that person gets addicted and it destroys their life, it destroys their mom's life. Or destroys their brother's life. Because they love them so much, and now they don't get to know them anymore because the addiction has consumed them so much. And they didn't even know the vulnerability that they were susceptible to. They didn't know that they could potentially be under something that could destroy their life. I took a study at Belton New Tech that said about 50% of people, 50% of the students, have easy, complete access to drugs and alcohol. 50%. That's half the students at this school, give or take. What is stopping those 50% from giving it to the other 50%? What's stopping them from being enablers? What is stopping them from spreading the addiction and spreading the idea that part of the social standard is that, you've never done drugs before, then you're not cool, then you're not worth it. What's stopping them? If everyone is vulnerable to this, especially that 60% that's 8 times more likely with that addictive personality that can't just have one drink, that can't just smoke one cigarette, they have to smoke many because they have that 8 times vulnerability. What is stopping one half from affecting the other? What is stopping our parents who have bad habits themselves from passing down those bad habits to us? There's nothing stopping it except for the community as a whole to get rid of the social norm and to discard the social norm that drugs and alcohol and narcotics are just part of life. I only have one question for not only whoever's watching this, but to the youth as a whole. The part of history is that you're supposed to learn from the mistakes of the ones who come before you. And the ones who come before you might have left you at a disadvantage, and they might leave you with a vulnerability that you didn't ask for, but that doesn't mean that you have to do what they did. So the answer to the question is no. Addiction is not hereditary. It's not. Just because your mom was an alcoholic doesn't mean you're going to be an alcoholic. But the vulnerability is hereditary. The fact that you're more likely to be an addict, that is hereditary. But the choice is completely yours. The choice is in the person. So the only question that I would have for us as a whole is, are we going to follow in the footsteps of those before us?